Welcome everyone to Knowledge, Behaviors, and Skills, how the need for greater business agility is going to change learning in 2022. I'm Samantha Lang. I'm the Marketing Content Director with SAP Litmos, and we are happy as always to be here with our partners over at Fosway Group. And here on the video, as you can see, is our old friend David Perring. He is the Director of Research for Fosway Group. And before I hand it over to David, David's going to kick off our agenda, and then we'll get into the bulk of the presentation. We will, of course, be taking your questions as time allows. So if you can see in the interface there's a Q&A box, and go ahead and feel free to type your questions in as we go. We'll most likely wait until the end to address them, but feel free to type them in as they occur to you. And then also, we are, of course, recording today's session. So if you have to drop off or you want to share the recording with a colleague after the fact, we will be sending out the link to the recording shortly after today's presentation. And I think that's all the housekeeping items we probably need to cover. And with that, I'll hand it over to David.
Oh, thanks so much, Sam, and thank you so much for having me back to go through another presentation and really sort of focus on a few interesting angles, really around why business and personal agility matters, especially in this climate. We've got so much to cover around this whole agenda in a way, but also explore what's changing in organizations and HR to enable organizations to be more agile. And we're seeing quite a few changes fundamental to how people support career development and resourcing and learning engagement, which is sort of driving maybe a new wave of thinking. And also explore how developing knowledge and skills and behaviors is really the underpinning for future success for organizations as well, just given the amount of scale of change that's happening and how L&Ds are evolving as teams and as their provision to drive agility and really ramp up their strategic value. And as I said, we've got a lot to cover. And as Sam said, if you have any questions as we go through, please throw them at us. But what I want to start off with is a very cheery headline from Forbes, which is just about 2 weeks old now. So this was released on the 10th of February. And they had an article that said, "Don't blink, the next crisis is closer than you think." Which you might think, hey, we've been through enough crises over the last 2 years. We don't need any more. But I thought it was really interesting because they really said, pick your disaster. And whether it's about storms or supply chain disruptions or global power shortages or fuel security, actually the incidence of man-made and natural disasters seems to be increasing. So how do organizations cope? They have to be able to be agile. They need to be responsive. Sometimes they need to anticipate what's coming just to be able to cope. And Sam, I remember when we talked through the slides, you referenced the film Don't Look Up. And I think maybe this is a part of that story. Like, how do we respond in the appropriate way to be successful? And in a business context, business agility has some really interesting definitions. It's the ability of businesses to gain competitive advantage by delivering exceptional customer success through a combination of hyper-awareness, so really knowing what's going on, having data and intelligence that helps you understand and gives you a sense of feeling for where things are going, a sense of intelligent decision-making based both on data, but also in our intuitive sense of what's happening around us, and then that sense of rapid, flawless execution. So it's that sort of being aware this is going to happen, making a good decision, and instigating that decision and activating that decision at speed. And quite often, from a business point of view, that means about delivering innovation, doing things new in a different way, sometimes at a level of anticipation, that you almost know what a customer wants before they decide en masse that there's something that they should be going for. And just to put the importance of this into context, what I want to highlight was a really great article from the guys at McKinsey back in March 2020. So we're sort of into the first week of the pandemic. And they did some research into how organizations who've gone through a digital transformation are more successful and the scale of that success compared to other organizations. So the links in here, so we will make the deck available. I would strongly recommend going and have a look and read through that article. But just to pick out the highlights of it, does agility make a difference? According to the research from McKinsey, your customer satisfaction is between 10 and 30 points higher for those organizations who have some form of agile transformation, of thinking about the market space, their employees, their products in a more agile way. It's not necessarily just about thinking about agile as a software methodology, but just having an agile mindset. They've also picked out that organizations that have gone through an agile transformation also achieve higher employee engagement of between 20 and 30 points improvement over people who haven't. And then the one at the end, right, the last one on the list is this sense of operational performance, which they say, yeah, by having a more agile approach, so being more visible around what the goals are, being more focused on a set of objectives, being more focused around releasing team energy and engaging people to bring themselves to work, you get a 30 to 50% increase in operational performance. And that translates as a whole bucket into 20 to 30% improvement in financial performance. Now, you might say, well, hey, maybe they used a skewed group. Maybe that's the sort of thing they would say because they are focused on digital transformation. But equally, these are such compelling numbers, right? They're outside the realms of statistical significance, or insignificance, should I say. So if you can buy into that, if you want to get access to that, then you probably need to be thinking about being a more agile organization and working in a slightly different way. Now, with the work that we've done, we sort of trawled through a lot of things around, so what do people put together as being business agility? What do they sort of really talk about? And we've sort of read through a number of sort of papers and other people's research and tried to distill this sense of what powers business agility. And the things that we've come up with are this sense of having a dynamic architecture. And what I mean by that is organizational structures which can flex and respond. So not necessarily be about being hierarchical, not necessarily about being just sort of command and control, but being that sort of flexibility of organization where you have solutions that are maybe probably more likely to be in the cloud, because being on-premise gives you constraints. Being in the cloud gives you more flexibility, being a bit more intelligence-driven, so thinking about how you get data from different sources and using that in the decision process, thinking about how that data is bound into decision-making processes, and analytics underpins what you do. But a lot of it is also about having fluid people structures, right? So maybe having organizations which are more about teaming than command and control, as I said, and maybe having a little bit more flex in their infrastructure and the processes. So it's all about sort of maybe having more fluid processes rather than rigid step-by-step processes, ones that can evolve and change rapidly. The other side of it is this sense of customer feel. So having a sense of empathy for customers, having a sort of focusing on a seamless experience, based on listening and feedback and dialogue, and using proactive intelligence and things are going. So having that sense of, I understand the heartbeat, I know what it was like to walk in the shoes of my customers, and these are the things that they're telling me which would help things improve, right? This would make them more likely to engage with us. And with that starts to become a sense of evolutionary purpose. So the purpose that we had maybe 10 years ago starts to shift and starts to change. And I'm sure you can think about how your own industry is starting to shift and to change as customers start to ask more questions about sustainability, for example, or the plasticization of their environment. How are you changing your packaging? And what does that mean for all the other things that have to go into the production process? So having that customer feel also drives agility, because you have to know where the market's going in order to respond in the right way. And the last side of this is this sense of organizational agility. So do you have a curious and digital mindset, one that is always looking to grow, and this almost growth mindset around people being flexible, adaptive, and being resilient because they're always curious about what the options are. but also a sense of total organizational learning. So not just providing courses, but engendering a culture of learning that helps people reflect, think, and see some of the evolutions around technology, which maybe give your organization an edge if you start to adopt them, but also this sense of continuous change, and being adaptive to learning, being maybe a bit more trust and connection and authenticity focused, and being about proactively including lots of people. And that almost builds a whole, almost sort of cultural backdrop to listening to your customers, engaging with the customers in a proactive way, but also thinking about the sort of organizational structures, be that people structures or systems or maybe where we work even, how those need to be a bit more flexible too. And that almost gives you a total organizational identity. But ultimately, it comes down to having amazing people who are highly skilled, very adaptive, who are change-orientated, authentic, people who are real teamers, for want of a better phrase, and people who are good listeners. And that sort of comes through as a total dynamic, almost as a sort of business agility, that sort of underlying fuel almost, a business agility.
Yeah, and
what
David,
we've seen is...
David,
sure.
may I speak to one of those on that? You know, and we'll talk more, I know as we go further, we'll talk more about how to develop some of those skills that you're referring to, some of the collaboration and those kind of skills that are, you know, becoming more and more important. But since I'm, for folks on the call, I'm from of course, the SAP Litmos team. So I see things from the learning perspective and the learning technology perspective. And I wanted to speak to the point in the organizational energy group there as far as the total learning organization. And one thing that we see with our customers is that in order to really to truly achieve the promise or the dream of that total learning organization, you really, really must have top-down support. And this is something we hear over and over again from our customers, and that whether your training is coming from an L&D department proper, or or an HR department, or even whether your training is coming from departmental or individual business unit type of a training structure, unless you have that top-down support, C-suite level of seeing the importance of training for the organization and what it means to the overall performance of the organization, it's very, very difficult to have really, really lasting success. And that was one of the few positives that came out of the pandemic that we saw with our customers, is all of a sudden, the C-suite was on board. They were like, whoa, learning isn't a nice to have anymore. Learning is an absolute must have, as they were seeing that there was this massive amount of reskilling that had to be done very, very quickly. How do I do my job from home? How do I do a changed job or an entirely different job? And we saw companies that were putting people in entirely new positions that they had never done before. So all of a sudden, that reskilling and the ability to scale out your training programs very, very quickly was a positive thing that came out of the pandemic. And even though hopefully as we come to the other side of that, we hope that the importance and the value that's placed on what training means to the organization, we hope that stays or gets even better.
Yeah. And that's such a good point, right? Because I think most organizations have understood the importance of agility. And we see that from HR teams as well, in terms of what they're talking about and the recognition of the importance of agility, not just because of the numbers that have come through from McKinsey, but just the realities of changing operations on the sort of head of a pin when the pandemic hit. But we know that organizations, when they encounter change, have to start to think about training so many different aspects. And some of this is about knowledge, some of it's about skills, sometimes it's about behavior. What I've got here are almost the predictable drivers for training, right? And in a more volatile world, a more maybe a complex world, one that's more unpredictable, these things happen at a higher speed, right? So that whole sense of the world, choose your next disaster, actually there are things that are changing around us, whether it's about new systems, whether it's about new processes or ways of working, which we've went through, how we onboard and engage with new starters, venturing into new markets, maybe that's supporting things like blockchain or cryptocurrencies, whatever it happens to be. There's all these new innovations which then start to bring in compliance. There's things that then mean that there are licenses that you have to complete in order to trade in particular new markets. There's the whole game of continuous improvement and helping people facilitate change through their soft skills. You can look at these as being individual triggers for driving new knowledge, new skills and behaviors. What typically happens is they come as a package of 3 or 4 different things. So as you venture into a new market, there's new regulatory compliance. You have to deliver new products. Maybe that means you introduce new systems. People need new skills to sell those new products, and so on and so forth. So there's maybe a culture shift in your organization. So we're almost in this space where if people are starting to adopt Agile as their methodology for how they release products, then your products are going to update probably every 2 or 3 weeks because you want a continuous beta. So helping people keep up to speed is part of that Agile story. And I think it's one of the sort of challenges is how we think about making the learning scale and reach. And that typically means using digital approaches, but also ensure that it's effective in that it drives the right outcomes. Because if you make all these changes, you still need people to be both resilient and high performing and not to feel swamped.
And David, I was going to, sorry, yeah, I keep making you go back.
That's all right. Jump in.
Thank you. Well, again, I'm going to comment to just one of the call outs on your continuum there. And it's that people skills / soft skills point. And as you're referring to sort of the cultural shift that certainly was, accelerated by the pandemic, I would note that even prior to 2020, to the spring of 2020, when all things went awry, we were seeing at SAP Litmos a really increased appetite for what we're referring to as people skills or soft skills courses there. So from our content library that we sell, we were seeing those courses really kind of flying off the shelves, if you will, and even started to shift perspective a little bit from should we even think of those things as soft skills? And I like the fact that you have people skills there as well, because I'm sort of starting to come from the perspective that I don't even know if that's the right term anymore, because, and sure, we're going to say it, but I mean, really, these are essential skills. And we will talk more about this further down the line here. But I mean, they're essential skills that now are some of the most sought after skills across different job functions. And those people skills are becoming more and more invaluable. And I've even seen some other research that was talking about what you were talking about earlier, which is this whole, idea of so much work is done in teams now, and that your ability to communicate and collaborate and that these things can be trained. It's not everybody is a natural communicator. Not everybody, as you were saying, not everybody's a natural good listener. Most of us aren't, right? I mean, but the fact that people can be trained on these things, and again, the value that brings to the organization as a whole.
And I think it's such a good point, right? And I think that I've spoken to other organizations and they've said the soft skills label doesn't work for us. We talk about power skills, and others say, well, no, power skills doesn't work because that makes it sound as though it's like power and influence, and that's not what we're about. And I think there is something about how you get work done through others, how you support others, how you really work together as a team. And that's got so much more complicated now we're working virtually, sort of knowing how people feel, getting the time to reach out to people and saying, you okay with what we're doing? Have you got more suggestions? How we create that more inclusive environment when we are sort of effectively working apart is a real difficult one.
We saw,
right? And I think that's it's a difficult one.
Yeah, we saw even a big appetite for courses like how to manage a remote team. I mean, imagine, you're a manager who's used to being able to, walk down the hallway and speak with people and get people in a room. And these were new skills that were being developed very, very rapidly.
Yeah. But it is the power skills, right? And I think the underlying side of that is actually it's the thing that powers the organization. When you get it right, people get energized. And I think if we think about people as being sort of a little bucket of energy, what are we doing to take away from that energy? and what are we doing to fuel that energy in the organization? And that does come down
Yep.
to the knowledge, the skills, and the behaviors, and the ability to make people feel good, right? When they've felt isolated or feel uncertain because of the amount of change that's going on. All these things really matter. So it's a complex problem, right? And then when you put it into the context of this is happening faster and faster, getting this right is really important as well. But we know that HR professionals have been recognizing agility matters in today's economy for the last 4 or 5 years. We've asked this HR Realities Research Survey and asked people to say, what are the most significant business challenges? And number one has always been increasing organizational performance and profitability. Number two, most of the time, has been improving customer satisfaction. Has been number one that sort of top 3 significant business challenges. And number 3, surprisingly, again, because it's been consistent for the last 4 or 5 years, is increasing business agility. But this year, 2021, should I say, was the first year that it went to number 2. So this recognition of agility being something that's really important to cope with the scale of change that's happening and how important it is to really be able to anticipate customer needs and put that into products and services that are sustainable is really important. So that's recognized. And what we know is that we've been through probably one of the biggest experiments in business agility ever, because we've all had to work from home for a year and are starting now to move back into the offices. But with that becomes a really significant sort of change for people as well to really understand. So how do I now work in the office when, I don't know, Sam and David are going to be at home for 4 days of the week? I need to do a meeting and 90% of the people are in the office. Do we have the meeting in the room? Do we have it virtually, even though we're sat next to each other? How do we make sure that people are engaged? We know that HR professionals have gone through a lot of change for their HR processes, but we still got a lot of journeys, I think, to go on to make sure we sort of prepare our people for the amount of change that's coming through in work as well. But from our survey, right, 93% said they've made changes to their strategy as part of the pandemic. Only 11% said that they were going to make deep and lasting changes. But the amount of change that's sort of happened, and I think what is worth sort of putting into perspective is the drivers and the things that are sort of most post-pandemic or in parallel with the pandemic, the sorts of changes that have happened, the disruptors, still that are swinging around us. Yes, the pandemic's still there, but we have the multi-generational workforce. What do we do about the people who are just coming into work for the first time? Maybe they just left university and after having a disappointing 2 years and not being able to go out and about and party like you used to be able to do. But they're looking for much more human connections around work. You've got all of the digital and agile transformations that are happening in organizations as they embrace new technologies to deliver their services. I remember working many years ago with an organization who worked in the automotive sector. And this is about 4 years ago. They were going through a digital transformation because the things that they made, things like the sponges and the coverings for car seats, they realized that actually it was the data that you got from somebody driving that increased the quality of the driving experience. So they put sensors into the seat so they knew how warm you were. They put sensors onto the windscreen so that it automatically put on the windscreen wipers and things like that. And they'd already thought about the digital transformation because the skills in their organization that they needed to have, they didn't have when it was just about foam density and the coverings on paint and how a paint flaked after 10 years of wear in particular temperatures. They needed to think differently. And that digital transformation brings a whole change in manufacturing processes and marketing processes. It's huge. And then you put that with a multi-generational workforce, people working from home, et cetera. It becomes really significant disruptors. You've also got the disruptors around people's identity. You've got disruptors around sustainability and potential ecological collapse. You have things around flexible working and hybrid working that we're starting to come to terms with, and all the data that surrounds people's view of, I don't want to go back into the office, whereas some of the younger generation are thinking, I have to be in the office. I don't want not to meet people. But all these things are coming together, and for those organizations that are providing good answers because they're in tune with their employees and their potential employees, they are accelerating. They've got a magnetic reputation. They're irresistible and they're attractive to new starters and employees just generally, and they are booming. They're going through a great growth. With that becomes a great deal of onboarding. For other organizations, they are feeling the sharper end of the Great Resignation. There was a report from the guys at Randstad in November last year, and they talked about 70% of UK employees looking for another job. And 25% of those were wanting to get a new job in 3 to 6 months. So the pressure that then creates for other people thinking, oh, there's another job I can go for, that creates an interesting dynamic. So there is this sense of having a great resignation. There is a chasm for hiring people and people struggling to find people that they can afford to put into roles that then become vacant. So there's strong pressures around stagnation and acceleration. So it's really interesting. What we're seeing organizations start to do is think about a combination of things to make themselves irresistible. Partly that is aligning to individuals' purpose and their sense of belonging and their sense of advocacy. So thinking about what does it mean to be a great place to work here? And what does that mean when you're sat at your dining room table? Thinking about lifelong growth and resilience. So how do we grow people's capabilities? How do we prepare them for the next roles? There's been a great focus on fostering wellness and well-being, a real focus on organizational agility and fluidity. So thinking less about command and control structures, but maybe being more project-based, being more gig-based, so that people can come together, work on a project, and move on to the next thing. And thinking about empowering all talent, not just the top tier, not just the high potential space cadets who were at the top of the organization who tended to leave anyway, but looking at everybody as being talent and liberating the potential of all people. Obviously, there's been a rethinking of workspaces, and that's still finding its way through in organizations. They think, what does it mean when you go back into the office if you're only going to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week? Do we have desks? Do we have hot desks? Do we have meeting spaces? What are you doing in the office? All those things are starting to work through, as long with all the things rethinking teams, rethinking collaboration, and that means Microsoft Teams or Slack plus how we work together as groups. And then there's a whole slew of skills and capabilities to enable you to bridge into new roles that are forming because of new technologies and new approaches. And then there's all the stuff about the fragmentation of work into, as I said, gigs and projects, rethinking what organizational success looks like, and maybe taking an approach maybe which is more aligned to OKRs rather than projects, and thinking about how we get everybody included. So all the things around Black Lives Matter, there's issues around gender equality and representation, which takes us back to a sense of belonging. And all these things we're seeing organizations think about this almost the employee experience, the EX, but actually it's about the me-X. How does it make me feel? And that personalization is really coming through. And what I want to sort of just pick out, sorry, Sam, please.
Oh, no, carry on.
Yeah. So what I want to just sort of pick out is this sort of.
Sorry, I thought you were going to continue on that side.
No, go back.
I have to comment. I have to comment on this slide because, first of all, we could spend an entire hour just talking about these points, and I was really happy to see this slide, to be perfectly honest, because some of these things that you just touched on they're so in the sweet spot of exactly what we've been up to at SAP Litmos and SuccessFactors as well, SAP SuccessFactors. Some of these points around identity and fulfillment, the purpose and belonging, lifelong growth, resilience. It's so interesting that the Great Resignation just made so many people question, what is my commitment to this organization? And hey, life is really fragile, and a crisis could happen, as you said. The next crisis could happen at any. Don't look up at any moment. And so, and I think it's truly a beautiful thing that this idea of connecting fulfillment and purpose to your job, because we spend so many waking hours at our jobs. And we have a philosophy at SuccessFactors and Litmos, which is purpose drives people. So if you truly want to get, as an organization, yeah, we say purpose drives people and people drive performance. So if you want to truly get that performance, that high level, consistent performance from people these days in the wake of the Great Resignation and all of this sort of enlightenment that came around that, you must figure out ways, and we would say do it through training, figure out ways to enable or empower people to feel connected to the organization by saying you do have a purpose. And there's no way that a business these days, well, I shouldn't say no way, but it's very, very difficult for a business to have sustained success if you're making your employees feel like just another cog in the machine, because then they're dropping out. Like you're saying, they're gone.
Yeah.
So yeah. To take it to a level where you're saying, how do we create training that connects people to the purpose of the organization and says your job role actually, it contributes to the purpose of the organization. And then even taking it one step further, could you even ignite a little passion? Could you even get people, well, I understand and I'm fulfilled and I like my job and I feel like I'm having some career development, but even beyond that, a little passion and excitement, I mean, training can be fun. Training can light the fire. So I love all of this, David, all these points on here. And some companies are doing it really, really well.
Yeah. But I think what's easy to underestimate is actually there's a lot of training and education that surrounds all of these pillars, right? All these things you might think of as being an antidote to some of the disruptors and help you be an accelerator rather than stuck in stagnation. There's a lot to help people come to terms with. And so at a point when a manager isn't in control of having a hierarchy, maybe they have a more fluid team, that's a hell of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questioning about, so what's my role? How do I make this work? So the information, the feedback loops that help them understand, yeah, this is your new role, this is how you execute it, and this is why we value you for your management role. It's not going away, but it's working a different way. All of that takes a lot of change, and that takes a lot of energy. And if you don't handle it right, you'll get a lot of maybe underinvested, empowered, and a lot of burnt out managers who don't feel as though they fit. So it's a long process, and all these things sort of come back to you want to be a great leader, you've got to be better at teaming, you've got to think about new processes. All these things come together. But it's interesting. I was just thinking what Robin put in as a question around any advice on to help leaders identify which skills to work on developing with their team. I think there is something about one of these items which talks about sort of trust and relationship. Actually, you can ask people, what would make me a better X, Y, or Z? And that's one way that you can probably start to do things almost from the roots up. Because if you have a trusting relationship with your peers, you can start to get some feedback to say, this would be things that I think would make you better at. The other things that we're seeing, and SAP have been doing some good work around this more generically, is starting to open up things like opportunity market spaces, as they're called, where gigs and projects and other work can be advertised, that managers can invite other people to be involved in their short-term projects or long-term projects, or maybe on a 2-day a week or 3 days a week or a couple of hours a week. What you're able to do is start to see, this is your skills inventory as you as an individual based on AI crawling over your CV and the projects that you've done, and then giving you recommendations for these are some of the skills that you should develop. So there's a lot of work that's being put in across many organizations who are starting to release skills and capability and think about how you bridge people to their future potential, which is using AI to pick out and highlight, this is your match for this activity or this future role. And those things are sort of happening automatically, but connecting back to the individual as well. So that's driving some really interesting change in dynamics, and then starts to enable individuals to take more ownership of getting feedback from mentors or coaches to say, I've had a go at this. What do you think? Could you give me some pointers on how I would be even better at that? So I think there's a lot of work that's sort of happening in that, both from SAP and others as well. But it's a really exciting time where it's not just about a manager owning skills, it's about organizations empowering individuals to connect with their skills as well. And there's some really interesting innovations around talent mobility which are driving that. Okay, Sam. Actually, if I skip on, I'll go through some of these other slides pretty quickly, just to say the things that we've got here around the pandemic and the need to be more agile. We've seen that sort of move ahead. The skills agenda is accelerated in organizations. Only 15% said it's less important. 56% have said it's more important. Around talent mobility and increased importance around that, only 6% say that's less important than before the pandemic. But what we've also seen, and this was some research that was reported in HR Director, was only 3/4 of employees are confident that they are properly trained to do their jobs. Only 1 in 6 feel that they've had enough training. 1 in 10 don't think they've been adequately trained. So that's 1 in 10 people in your workforce potentially say, I don't know how to do this. So actually, again, to ask people and have that level of trust of who needs some extra help, who needs some extra input, and whether that's from a peer or a manager or a course or some content as well, that's all part of the story. The other side of this is, again, from the HR Director article, 1 in 2 said they didn't receive any training and development from their employee in 2021, which is shocking, right? Because at the time when we needed most input, half of the people saying, I didn't get any. And for 70%, that's almost 1 in 4, said that for the last 3 years, they haven't had a great deal of training. So there is a lot of opportunity to entice other people's people to your organization through having this irresistible brand for developing people. And developing skills is a great way of keeping people interested and engaged. But what we know in terms of people's readiness
I have to just second your opinion on that. I found that particularly the second of these 2 slides in the red, pretty shocking, really pretty shocking. And of course, like coming at it from the learning technology perspective, this is not our world, but to see that 1 in 2, and even the 70% stat that you said before about the Great Resignation, I mean, that's pretty shocking. And 1 in 2 didn't receive any training in 2021. So what I would say to that is not only is it a little bit shocking, it's also quite sad because the resources are there. The technology is there. We have, the resources to best practices on how to do some of this stuff. And I'm not saying it's easy. Obviously, I'm not implying that it's easy, but that now that these big digital transformations are going on, and it doesn't even need to be big, even if you start small, that the technology and the resources are there to help your company. And, we're here to, talk about it and answer questions. And, but that we don't need to stay stuck. And if that's your organization, if you think that 1 in 2 people at your company didn't get any training last year, you're helping create all of the negative outcomes that we've been talking about, adding to the Great Resignation, not giving people a sense of purpose and connection and, connection to the goals of the company. And frankly, you're not going to be able to attract top talent because these days, top talent, they not only want career and professional development, they pretty much expect it, and it's becoming one of the most attractive things that a company can offer a person.
And that's been true for a very long time. That sense of actually, I think it was around 50% of individuals said they would leave to go to another employer for the same pay if they got better training, and that was back in 2016, right? Now it's probably even higher. I haven't seen some of the latest research. Again, if you send some research, do put it into the chat, and useful to share with others. But
I saw one of the comments in the Q&A too. I think someone put something in there about professional and personal development. And that's really, really key. And it's kind of what you were getting back at, like even some of the mental health and well-being, those things. I mean, we're very, very fortunate at SAP. SAP takes very good care of us. We get access to all kinds of resources around mental health and well-being and physical well-being. And so it's, those kind of things are very, I mean, personally, I'm so grateful for those things that are offered to us as employees.
And I think it's true for many organizations who get it. They understand that it releases the discretionary effort, which creates high-performing organizations. So actually, the organizations that are high-performing work harder because people are energized to do so. They don't see it as really the natural boundary between work and a separate other life. It's like, just happens to be what I do because I love it. And the more we can
Yeah,
release that, the better.
yeah. We
People
used
still need
to
to have a
we used
break.
Yeah, we use the term whole person. It's a whole person
Yeah,
philosophy, because you're not just your job role. You're not just the person that's you're a whole person. So yeah, we subscribe to this wholeheartedly.
exactly. But it's so important, right? And what we know is that for many organizations, this sense of this sort of skills are L&D ready for the tsunami of demand around skills and people's development. Actually, we know it's a high priority. Two-thirds say it's a high priority, and only a small fraction say that it's sort of not a priority. Like, well, you've got 4% who say it's pretty low or not a priority. There's a huge issue, and people trying to hire new people into their organizations. We hear lots of stories, even from suppliers in this space, saying, I can't get a hold of salespeople. When I do that, they cost me loads more than they used to, and I know they're going to be gone in 6 months because they can get more money. They just keep on hunting. So it's a real challenge to grow those skills. We know that there are significant skills gaps. 75% believe they've got significant skills gaps in their organization. And that goes back to some of the data we shared a little bit earlier. And again, to reiterate what you were saying earlier, Sam, the sense of actually it's the soft skills which are more important than the hard skills. And this was a quote from somebody who did one of our surveys last year around the skills realities research that we did, and almost this time last year, when it released it. That sense of collaboration, communication, goodwill, and I love this word, indulgence, are now the skills that we need to make things work fine and achieve our goals, especially when working remotely. So having a natural feel for people is something that's super important, and how we take time and our skills in managing that is really huge. But what we know is that many organizations aren't great at that.
Oh, David, I apologize.
Yeah,
On that note,
that's right.
just to squeeze in a comment here, I made a note that many people on the meeting today have probably seen the recent LinkedIn, I think it was last year's LinkedIn study that was talking about the most sought after skills, and that HR professionals are really encouraging people to put these things on your resume, figure out a way to describe some of the soft skills. I saw in the chat, people are saying somebody does call them power skills, essential skills, whatever, people skills, whatever we're going to call them. But I made a note that some of the top ones, in addition to the ones you have listed here, that were on the LinkedIn study as the top sought after skills that employers are looking for. I noted creativity, innovation, persuasion. That's a good one. And persuasion, being able to really, communicate and listen and persuade. And then also adaptability, just someone's ability to be resilient. And I would even say that we offer a course off the shelf Litmos library. We offer a course called Developing Resilience, which is a critical thing now. And we, things like stress management, there's courses for handling individual stress management. You've talked a lot about teams. We have a course around managing team stress, which is really, that's a really valuable thing right now. It's not just an individual's personal mental health. It's, well, how is the team managing stress among members, and what do those dynamics look like, and how can we train to improve how people communicate and listen and collaborate and so forth, all the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's super important. And I think that sense of being a great place to work, I love working here, being the sort of mantra of organizations, becomes really crucial. And when you add that layer also of, working here does some good. That's sort of part of your irresistible sort of employer brand in a way. But what we've also found is that actually the number of organizations that create time to allow people to develop their skills, the number of organizations that invest in rewarding skills development, the ones that invest in career planning based on skills, at best, they're sort of 50-50, right? People who agree with that they are a leader in developing skills and fueling skills. And if it's in an ideal world, you probably have a more 80-20 relationship. That's what you typically see sort of on a Pareto scale. But there's a lot of opportunity to outcompete others for good talent by getting these things right, by creating space for learning, by rewarding people's development, making part of their bonus plan, by investing in their skills and recognizing their skills to put them forward into future roles. If you do that well, actually, you become part of that irresistible brand that attracts more better people and keep better people as well. The other side of this is actually that the soft skills are the power skills. We mentioned that earlier on. When we ask people what skills are most important for your organization to develop in the future, the ones that stand out are about team working, leadership and management, project change and transformation. The technical skills start to come in at number 4. Then you've got interpersonal skills, so ability to communicate, and then you get software skills. Now, those are the ones that are very important. And I saw a comment about, would you hire somebody with a high level of soft skills but no hard skills? You're sort of right, but would you hire somebody who has technical skills but no interpersonal skills and no projects ever happen? You probably wouldn't want them either. So trying to find this balance, the yin and yang of people who are good people, who energize others, who get work done with the technical expertise that you need, that's the sweet spot. And a lot of this is about how we use feedback and traits and behaviors to sort of help us develop those skills on an ongoing basis. And what I want to sort of just pick out is when we ask L&D teams, what are the most impactful approaches to resolving skills gaps? The one they pick out are managers developing their people, on-the-job assignments, buddy and mentoring, face-to-face training, and I guess that's virtual still at the moment, so virtual classrooms, and coaching and mentoring. Those are the ones that people say make the biggest impact on skills gaps. So how you create an environment that enables people to get job assignments and find a buddy and effectively learn through work is something that we see sort of most L&D people say, this is what makes an impact on skills development. So the courses help, give us maybe a base layer of knowledge and help us keep up to speed with all the changes that are going on. But the practice in real world environments is what really makes a difference. When you sort of look at this in the sort of through the list, it's the ones down the bottom, right? Sort of formal educational programs, talent pipeline, personal learning budgets, career planning. Actually, it's all about practical work, which actually people say drive the biggest impact. And I think what that means is when we think about how we create a mix of learning, we need to think about that content mix, what do we need to reinvent the wheel for or not reinvent the wheel? And how do we focus on the things that are important for us as an organization, that combination of knowledge, skills, and behaviors? And to some extent, to help you understand where you invest in your money around learning and training programs, you've almost got the scale of change. Is it some personal change that people want to go through, or is it a significant business challenge? And then how differentiating it is for your organization. Is it just about everyday business? Is it something that's very unique to your business, very unique to your organization rather than just everybody does it? And to some extent, where you really focus your time is on the significant business changes, those priority bespoke programs to some extent. But there's a lot of things that people have to orientate themselves to as personal change. And they may be things that to some extent, if they're unique to your business, you'll need to create your own learning and maybe do your own coaching. But if it's about generic skills, which apply to everybody, then maybe you should be sourcing that from off-the-shelf content, resources, and coaching. And being able to personalize that is what makes the difference. So sort of we all work with finite amount of money and finite amount of time, and it's all about trying to get a big bang for your buck. So trying to find that right mix, that content sort of mix of resources that scale without reinventing the wheel, things that work, and trying to find the right combination. So that if it is about maybe how to run a virtual meeting in an organization, well, you can get most of that maybe from a generic source. What it means in your organization to get good at that skill, that's where you start to do more coaching and maybe more one-to-one feedback from people who attended the sessions even. So that sort of sense of how you create this sort of content mix is something that organizations are probably looking a little bit more proactively around than they might have done in the past. But overall, if you want to sort of drive a higher performing organization, it's really about trying to create time People have been under a lot of pressure just to do their work, but try and create a little bit more time to almost unleash some of that continuous learning cycles. What we've seen in organizations is actually they have invested a lot more in multi-channel learning delivery. We did some benchmarking in 2018, which we then compared to some same survey of about 500 global employers in 2021. And where people had significantly extended their learning was around in multi-channel learning delivery, so things that are the online courses and virtual training, but also in supporting people's application of learning on the job after learning. That's been a really big lift in terms of people's approach. So there has been a bit of a shift to sort of learning at work, but learning through work. And part of that process means about being a bit more constructive, a bit more focused on how we create mentoring relationships and coaching relationships and peer-to-peer relationships, which enable us to get feedback and suggestions to say, hey, if you did this, then that skill would improve. Or I love what you did there, keep on doing more of that, and that skill will get better. So those are the sorts of things that we're sort of seeing organizations report that they're doing more. And there is this sort of like a fresh focus almost on learning for performance. All those drivers that we spoke about earlier, new systems, new starters, new processes, new products, delivering that at speed and scale, we're seeing almost a fresh focus on that. And what that means is probably a lot more knowledge-based training, more than skills-based training, because it's knowing how to cope with the amount of updates and changes that are happening within our products or processes or pricing. All those things really matter. So there's been that sort of constant churn on that side of things. But what we've also
David,
seen is
on that last point, just really quickly, yeah. I did see when I first saw this slide and I looked at your list of challenges there. I will say, at least from the as it relates to e-learning, it may be different when we're talking about how in-person learning is managed or live is. But a lot of these challenges are very, very addressable if you have the right learning technology. And again, of course, I'm entirely biased, but I really did see many of these challenges as being, well, if you do have the right, LMS and the right access to a content library, I mean, you can scale, you can automate for speed, you can, I mean, clearly there's built-in, analytics reporting for measuring outcomes, something that's been historically very, very difficult for L&D teams to do. Just in time, in the flow of work, all these things, can be addressed with the right technology. Personalization.
And I think that's a really important point. Yeah, and I was just thinking back to what Robin was saying earlier on about how do we get people to understand what skills they need to focus on, and how do we help managers understand that. As I said earlier, the AI is starting to help match people and understand what skills they have based on their experience and their own feedback and other sources. Maybe it's performance management sources, their CV, the projects they've been involved in. All those are starting to help provide a view of the individual, which the systems are starting to say, actually, I've got a sense of your skills profile, and then validating that with the individual, but also using 360 to get some feedback from managers and peers, which is then helping us personalize the development focus for individuals as well. And linking that not only to my aspirations as an individual, so using my career goals to give me an indication of, try to develop these skills, connect with these people to help you develop those skills, but also about the roles that are available within the organization as well. So any future roles that the organization is branching out to, the system can starting to come back and say, if you develop these skills, you'll be even better fit for some of these future projects. Why don't you get involved? So there is a sort of a whole automated nudging, and the sort of sense of a marketplace coming to individuals is a really significant shift from what we would have done before, in terms of having a job board and maybe hoping that a manager might tell us that those were the priorities for our skills development. There's a lot more openness, and there's probably a lot more transparency around the in-demand skills, and also a lot more transparency around the resources that are available to me as an individual to develop some of those in-demand skills to make me as an individual more in demand. So that skills piece, the sort of challenges used to be really tough. It used to take maybe a year to define the skills within the organization, in which time all those skills are out of date. Now those things start to happen within weeks and months rather than a year. And that's having a transformative effect on quite a few organizations. There's some great case studies from Schneider Electric, Unilever. I know SAP have been playing in that space as well with people like Vodafone. So those are all very public in terms of being spoken about in forums. So it's a really interesting time, and you don't have to almost be in the pocket of your manager to understand where your skills are yourself. There's a lot more openness and transparency around where that can come from. The other thing I just want to sort of talk about is just this sense of what we're also seeing organizations do to resolve skills is actually think about learning sprints. So once I get a sense of these are some of the priorities for me and my career, actually thinking about where do I get some input? Maybe that was an off-the-shelf content library, maybe it was some coaching, maybe it was a mentor conversation, taking action in a project, maybe it was an assignment or my day-to-day role, getting feedback from people who watched what I did, or some reflections on feedback on listening to what other people who are expert in this field say works, reflecting on what that means for me, maybe seeking some more input, either from that individual or from some resources, and then put it into action again. So a very action-centered, almost hybrid learning approach, which means you don't necessarily always have to come into the classroom or go to a piece of content, but it embeds content and other learning into that cycle of work. But it makes you very dependent on trying to think about the relationships you have with others. And that feedback may be something that is prompted as part of the program, or maybe more interestingly, it's something that people can solicit themselves. You can get feedback from all the people who are in the room and say, what did you think worked? What would be better next time? So those things I think are things that are changing as well. The other side of things is the sense of just given the amount of change that's going on, not learning is not an option. So we do need to think about constant evolution of our people. We do need to think about what fits the audience as well. Just because I put a tortoise on a motor scooter doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere. It might be the best motor scooter ever, but if it's not designed for that individual, that experience isn't designed for that individual, if it doesn't fit the user, then it's no good. So we need to think much more about listening to our audiences to help us get to where we want to go. And just given the amount of change that is coming down the line, be that digital transformation, be it sustainability, maybe it's pollution, whether it's extinction events, issues of equality and inclusion, growth, recycling, the skills that got us here won't get us to where we want to go. So there's going to be a lot of change coming. Be agile in how you facilitate that and make it happen. So Sam, I think we sort of got a little bit to the end of the time. Maybe we should have wrapped up a bit sooner. Apologies for dragging it on. But maybe if we've got a minute just to ask a couple of questions, if we've got, if we can people might indulge us for 5 minutes, maybe we could just pick up any questions. I know we picked up Robin's earlier.
Yeah, and first of all, we are getting the simple, pragmatic question. Yes, the recording will be available if you're still with us. And I would just really like to thank everybody who have given us fantastic comments. There are a lot of comments in the Q&A, which thank you all for your input. We're not going to read those aloud. I think, David, we probably only have time for one.
Sure.
Oh, no, we just got, thank you very much. We really do appreciate your feedback, folks. Really great. I wanted to, this is a kind of tough question, put you on the spot.
Okay.
How advanced are L&D teams in innovating learning now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, right? And I think what I understand is everybody's on a different journey. We've got some research which is going on at the moment, and we're probably about a third of the way into our sort of feedback. So we're still in sort of hundreds or so of respondents. And what we see is the people who say they're quite advanced or advanced, typically only half say they're advanced around mobile learning or thinking about innovative learning approaches. Only a third at this stage say they are advanced around learning in the flow of work. Only 10% say they're good at measuring the impact on performance and productivity. So there's a lot of people who are starting, And you're probably looking at a third of those across workflow learning and innovative learning approaches and mobilizing around strategic priorities who are just starting that approach. So just because you haven't ventured into doing more innovative things, don't think it's too late. There's a massive opportunity starting now, because it tends to be a 2 or 3 year program, is a good thing to do. So don't feel as though you're behind. It doesn't take you long to catch up if you choose the right partners and the right solutions.
Great. Thanks for that. And we do need to wrap up. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Before we go, I think we put in there's like an additional resources box in the interface here. Please come visit us at Litmos. That's litmos.com. You can visit us for a trial, litmos.com/trial, litmos.com/demo if you're interested in getting some of the things going that David was just suggesting to get the e-learning programs really up to speed in a hurry. We're able to do it very quickly. I think that's it. David, thank you so much for your time today and your always wonderful insights.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. And thanks everybody for sticking around. I appreciate we gone over, and been a pleasure as usual. If you've got any questions, please reach out to us via LinkedIn and other channels. Always happy to pick up the conversation.
Thank you.